The first thing I did that morning, before the sun was up, before anyone else swiped into the bay, was put my hands on a cold engine and feel something in my chest come loose that had been tight for 10 years. It was a little after 0500. The maintenance bay was empty and gray, lit by the long fluorescent tubes that hum at a pitch you stop hearing after a week. A light tactical truck sat under the second lift with its hood up, waiting for whoever cared enough to look. I cared. I had signed for a set of keys and a locker the afternoon before, and I had not slept much. And instead of lying in an empty room staring at a ceiling I did not know yet, I came in early, pulled on a pair of plain green coveralls, rolled the tape under so my name would not catch on anything, and went to work. Nobody had told me to. That was the point. For the first time in a very long time, nobody had told me to do anything, and I had chosen this. I traced the coolant lines with 2 fingers, following the cold metal until I found the weep at a cracked fitting, and I felt the old happiness move through me, quiet and complete. The happiness of a problem that has an answer, and hands that know how to reach it. There is a particular smell to a shop before it wakes up. Cold steel and old oil and the rubber of new tires stacked in the corner, and I stood in it and breathed it the way other people breathe sea air on the first morning of a vacation. I was 34 years old. I had spent a decade being pointed at, and all I had ever wanted, through every ribbon cutting and every camera and every dinner where a stranger gripped my hand too hard and thanked me for my service in a voice thick with something I could not use, was to be back under a hood at 5 a.m. with grease working into the lines of my knuckles. I laid my tools out on a rolling cart the way I like them, not the way the last person left them, biggest to smallest, sockets in their rail. And there is a kind of prayer in that, arranging the instruments of a thing you love. Then I got up under the truck, and I started to actually listen to it. At about 0620, the shop began to fill. Boots on concrete, the metal shriek of roller doors going up one after another down the line, the first radio finding a station and settling on something with a beat. I stayed where I was, half inside the engine bay, listening, letting the sounds tell me about the place. You can learn a shop by its noise. A good shop has a rhythm to it. Tools and voices layered easy over each other. A bad shop is either dead silent or too loud, and this one, I was already deciding, was somewhere in between. A shop that could go either way depending on who was setting the tone. A puddle of coolant had spread out from under the truck across the smooth painted floor, bright green under the lights. I would get to it. I was chasing the crack first because a spill is a symptom, and I would rather fix the thing that is bleeding than mop up the blood and pretend. A young soldier came around the front of the truck with a travel mug in his hand and stopped when he saw the puddle. He was maybe 22, sharp haircut, high and tight, the kind of clean uniform a man wears when he has not yet had a morning that dirties it. He had the look of someone who had decided the shop was his, and everyone in it was arranged below him in an order he had worked out to his own satisfaction. He looked at the spill, and then he looked at me, at the coveralls and the grease to my wrist and the loose hair, and I watched a small, easy decision happen behind his eyes. He decided who I was. It took him less than a second. It always does. "Hey," he said, "you planning to clean that up or just stand in it?" I did not answer. I set the wrench down on the fender and reached for a rag. He waited, and my silence seemed to bother him more than a reply would have, the way it bothers a certain kind of man when the world does not immediately arrange itself around his voice. "We don't pay you to stand there, honey," he said, louder now, because an audience had arrived, 2 more soldiers drifting over by the tool cage with their coffee. "Grab a mop." He balled up a shop rag and flicked it at my chest, an underhand little toss, the kind of thing a man does when he is certain there will be no cost to it. It bounced off me and landed in the coolant. One of the soldiers at the cage laughed, a short bark, and said something under his breath, and the young man grinned, pleased with himself, the way you are pleased when a joke lands and the room gives it back to you. I bent down and wiped the oil off the top of my boot instead. I had learned a long time ago that the loudest thing in a room is the person who does not answer. There is a discipline to it that people mistake for weakness, and the mistaking is part of the discipline. So I did not answer. I picked the rag up out of the puddle, and I got the mop from the rack by the wash sink, and I cleaned the coolant off the floor without a word, working the mop in slow, overlapping strokes, because the floor needed cleaning, and I was the one standing there. And doing a thing that needs doing has never once, in my whole life, made me smaller. The corporal, whose name I would learn was Pretty, took my silence for what he wanted it to be. He leaned back against the workbench and watched me mop like a supervisor, watching the help, sipping his coffee. and he was comfortable, deeply comfortable, and he had no idea in the world that the woman pushing the mop across his floor had once carried 3 grown men out of a burning kill zone with her own 2 arms while the mountain came apart around her. "Get the corner too, Ictis," he said, pointing with the mug. "People walk through here." I got the corner too. I finished the floor, I wrung the mop and set it back on the rack, and I ran a little water in the sink and washed my hands, not to please him, just because a person washes their hands. And then I went back to the truck, and I picked my wrench back up off the fender, and I found the crack in the fitting, and I put a new fitting on, and I torqued it to spec, and I thought, without any heat at all, without the smallest need to say it out loud. Let them think what they need to think. The truck does not care who I am. And this morning, neither do I. This morning it is the best gift I have been given in 10 years, to be nobody at all, standing in a cold bay doing the only thing I was ever any good at. There is a thing that happens to your hands after enough years of this work, and it is the closest thing to a gift I have ever been given. They learn to listen. They can find a bad bearing by the roughness that comes up through a socket, hear a fuel problem in the little hitch of an idle, feel the exact quarter turn where a bolt goes from snug to stripped, and stop a hair before the thread lets go. My hands learned to do that when I was 19 years old, in a shop not so different from this one, taught by a grizzled sergeant who believed that a mechanic who could not diagnose by feel was just a parts changer with a manual. No metal, no photograph, no podium ever taught them anything half as true as that man did, with a scowl and a flashlight and an hour of his patience. While Corporal Pretty supervised the air, the truck told me its second secret, the one that was not on the work order, there was a miss in the idle, faint, so faint that most people would never catch it over the noise of a busy bay. It was the kind of thing 3 men can lean over and argue about for an hour, one blaming the fuel, one blaming the plugs, one blaming the last guy who touched it. I did not argue with anyone, because there was no one to argue with, and because arguing is what you do when you cannot yet hear the answer. I listened. I put my hand flat on the cover and felt the little stumble come up through my palm, and I traced it to a connector on the harness that had backed out just enough to break the circuit under vibration and reseat itself when the engine settled, which is the worst kind of fault, the intermittent kind, the kind that makes a mechanic feel like they are losing their mind. I pushed it home until it clicked, the engine smoothed, the truck stopped telling me it was sick. The shop's senior man came over then, Master Sergeant Trask, 41, built like a man who had spent his whole life lifting the heavy end of things, with a face that had learned to be patient, because impatience in a motor pool gets people hurt or killed. He watched the last 30 seconds of what I had done, and he looked at the engine, now running clean, and I could see him revising an opinion, though not the important part of it. He thought I was a very good civilian contractor, maybe a retired mechanic picking up shop hours. He did not think I was a soldier, and it did not occur to him to think it, because I had given him no reason to, and that was exactly the way I wanted it. "You've done this before," he said. "A little," I said. He looked at the reseated connector, then at me, and he almost asked. I watched the question form and then decided it was not worth the trouble. "Runs better than it has in a month," he said instead. "Whatever you're getting paid, it's not enough." And he went back to his morning, and he did not push, and I liked him for that. A man who does not need to know everything about you before he decides you are all right is a rarer thing than you would think. People wonder why anyone would want to be anonymous. They ask it the way you would ask why a person would want to be poor, as if it is obviously a thing to escape. They have never been looked at the way I had been looked at. For 10 years, the country I served had done exactly 2 things to me, and only 2. Either it saluted a photograph of me, a still image of a very young woman in dress blues, with a light blue ribbon at her throat printed on recruiting posters and blown up on easels at fundraising dinners and shown to auditoriums of teenagers who were supposed to want to be her. Or when I was out of the good lighting and the story was not being told, when I was just a tired person in a checkout line, or a woman in coveralls in a cold bay, it looked straight through me as if I were furniture, as if I did not resolve into a person at all. There was never, in 10 years, a version where I was simply a human being doing a job that I was good at. The photograph was not me. The furniture was not me. I had begun to lose track of where, between those two, the actual person had gone. So this corporal looking through me was, if I am being honest, almost a relief. At least it was honest. He did not want anything from me. He was not going to ask me to stand next to him and smile for a camera, or to say a few words, or to be brave on cue for the benefit of a room. He thought I was the help. And this morning, this specific gray morning, Being the help felt like the truest and deepest rest I had known in a decade. I could disappear into the work. Nobody was measuring me against a poster. Nobody was disappointed that the real woman was shorter or tireder or quieter than the legend. I was just a pair of hands and an engine, and for a little while, that was allowed to be enough. I caught my own face in the side mirror of the truck, grease on one cheek, hair coming loose from where I had pinned it, a small line between my brows from concentrating, and for 1 second, one full, unguarded second, I liked the woman I saw. Not the woman on the poster. This one. The one with dirt on her face. I had not been able to say that about any version of myself in a very long time, and I stood there and let it be true for as long as it would last, which was not long, because things like that never are. The road that made me was in eastern Afghanistan in March of the year 2013, and I have never once had to reach very far to find it. It is always right there, a half step behind me, waiting in the smell of diesel and a certain quality of wind and the particular gray of a sky before real light. I was 21, a specialist, a wheeled vehicle mechanic attached to a combat sustainment convoy, which is a long and bloodless way of saying that I kept the trucks running that kept everyone else alive, and I rode with them into places where a truck that would not move was a coffin with people already inside it. There is a myth that mechanics stay safe in the rear. The trucks do not break in the rear. They break where the road is worst, and the road is worst where someone wants it to be, and so I spent that deployment a lot closer to the edge of things than my job title suggested. We ran a mountain road that day that we had run a dozen times before, a gray ribbon cut into the side of a long slope, a drop on one side that went down farther than you wanted to look, and bare rock rising on the other. It was a road that made everyone quiet in the trucks. Because a place that could kill you does that, it presses the talk out of a vehicle even when nothing is happening. And for 2/3 of that road, nothing was happening. And then everything happened at once. The lead vehicle went up first, on a charge that had been buried in the road and waiting, and the sound of it was not a sound so much as a thing that hit you in the chest and took the next few seconds away. And then the fire came in from the high ground, aimed and steady, and inside of a minute, 2 of our trucks were burning, and the neat world of a convoy became something with no shape to it at all. I am not going to describe it more than I have to. I have learned that the details do not help anyone, least of all me, and that the people who want them are usually the people who were not there. What matters, the only thing that matters, is that there were men inside those burning trucks, and the doors were jammed from the blast, and the heat coming off them was the kind that speaks to your body in a language older than language, a language that has exactly one word in it, and the word is away. And I did not go away. I have turned the reason over in my hands for 13 years, looking for the noble version, and I have never found it. I did not decide to be brave. There was no decision in it that I can locate. My hands just knew that there were latches and hinges and men on the far side of them, and my hands had spent their whole short life opening things that were stuck. And my body followed my hands into the heat before the part of me that does the deciding had been consulted at all. I went back in the first time, and I got our gunner, and his leg was wrong, folded at an angle legs do not make, and I got him up and out and behind the rock face where the fire from the high ground could not reach, and I do not remember it hurting, though it must have. I went back in the second time for the driver of the second truck, and he was a big man, heavier than me by 80 pounds at least, and he was unconscious, dead weight, and I do not to this day know how I moved him, except that you find out on a day like that what you are actually made of, and it is almost always more than you feared, and a great deal less than you would like. The third man was Danny Saris. Specialist Danny Saris, 20 years old, from a small town in a state I had never had a reason to think about, who kept a photograph of his family's dog tucked into the band of his helmet and could not carry a tune in a bucket, but sang anyway, all the time, badly and happily, and called everyone chief, regardless of their actual rank, because he had decided years before that it was funny and had simply never stopped. I reached him last because he was the farthest in, and I got him out, and I got him behind the rock with the others, and I put my hands where the pressure needed to be, and I held it with everything I had, and it was not enough. It is a terrible thing, maybe the most terrible thing I know, to have someone's entire life running out under your hands, and to be doing every single thing right, everything you were trained to do, and some things you were not, and to understand somewhere in the middle of it, in a cold, clear place beneath the panic, that right is not going to be enough today, that the arithmetic has already been done by someone other than you, and it does not come out in your favor. "Tell my mom I wasn't scared," Danny said. His voice was very calm. "That is the thing nobody tells you, how calm they often are. He was scared. Of course he was scared. So was I. We were both barely more than kids and a long way from anyone who loved us, and the mountain did not care about him and did not care about me and would not have cared about 1,000 of us. I told him I would tell her. I said it looking right at him so he would believe it, because it was the last useful thing I had, and I was not going to waste it. And 9 months later, I stood in a small, clean kitchen in that town I had never had a reason to think about. And I looked his mother in the eye, and I told her that her son was not afraid at the end, that he was calm and brave and thinking of her. And I will carry that lie for the rest of my life, gladly, because it was the only thing left on this earth that I could give her, and it cost me nothing except the truth. And the truth was mine to spend however I chose. I drove a disabled truck out of the kill zone with the wounded in the back of it, on a flat tire and a fuel line I had crimped shut with my own fingers, at about 11 kilometers an hour, which does not sound like anything until it is the speed at which you are trying to outrun a thing that wants to kill everyone you are carrying. It was the slowest and longest ride of my life, and I have taken it again in my sleep more times than I can count. I took a wound of my own on that road that left a scar along my ribs and earned me a small medal I genuinely never think about, because it is a medal for bleeding, and bleeding is the least of what happened that day. 2 years later, in a room with more gold on the ceiling than I had seen in my whole life put together, a man whose name you would recognize stood in front of me and lifted a light blue ribbon dotted with white stars and lowered it over my head to rest at my throat and read words about conspicuous gallantry, and a nation decided that I was a hero. My mother cried. The 3 men I carried were there, all 3, standing, one of them on a leg that worked again because surgeons are also a kind of mechanic. It was, I will not lie to you, one of the great days of my life, and I would not give it back. And then the nation did the second thing, the thing no one warns you about, the thing that is not in any citation. It took the mechanic, the girl whose hands could hear an engine breathing wrong, and it made her a mascot. It discovered that a young woman with that medal was useful in ways that had nothing to do with anything I could do, and it put me to work being useful in that new way. They gave me the highest honor my country has to give. And then, without ever seeming to notice they were doing it, they took away the only thing I had ever actually wanted, which was to go back to the shop and turn wrenches and be left alone to be good at the one thing that had ever made me feel entirely like myself. At 0900, the shop changed its weather. You feel a thing like that before you understand it, the way animals go quiet before a storm they cannot yet see. A stillness came in through the roller doors, a straightening, a change in the air pressure of the room. Conversations stopped in the middle of themselves, and then Master Sergeant Trask's voice cut across the whole bay, hard and formal and carrying, calling the shop to attention. Boots came together up and down the line. Wrenches went still on benches. I came out from under the hood and stood, wiping my hands on the rag out of pure habit, not thinking a great deal of it because commanders walk motor pools. It is one of the things commanders do, and this was very far from my first one. 3 men had come in through the personnel door. 2 were staff officers with the kind of immaculate combat uniform that has never seen a day of actual combat, the fabric still holding its creases, moving a half step behind into the flank. The 3rd man was a colonel. He was maybe 48, lean, with gray coming in hard at the temples and the still, economical way of moving that senior officers acquire when they have finally stopped needing to prove anything to anyone in the room. His name tape read Shaw. He was the brigade commander, and this was his post, and he had walked in on an ordinary maintenance visit, the kind of walkthrough that commanders do partly to be seen by their soldiers and partly to actually see, if they are any good, the true condition of the thing they are responsible for. Corporal Pretty snapped to attention like a man auditioning for a part he badly wanted. He had squared his uniform and arranged his face into its best competent expression, and he was already turned a few degrees toward the colonel, angled to be noticed, certain in his bones that whatever was about to happen in this bay, the woman with the mop was beneath the notice of every single person in the building, a piece of the furniture that had briefly been useful and could now be ignored. Colonel Shaw's eyes moved across the bay the way a commander's eyes move, taking a fast, honest inventory, and they passed over the trucks and the tool cages and the young soldiers standing tall and hopeful, and then they reached me, standing by the truck with a rag in my hands, and they stopped. He went still in a different way than the room had gone still. Not the stillness of command, the stillness of recognition. I watched him find my face and hold it and check it, quickly, against something he was carrying around in his head, and I felt my stomach drop, because I knew that look. I had seen it 1,000 times, and I knew with a certainty that was almost grief exactly what was about to happen, and there was nothing on God's earth I could do to stop it now. "Sergeant Vale," he said, quietly, almost to himself, and then he crossed the concrete toward me. He did not hurry, and he did not amble. He walked straight across that bay, past the staff officers, past Master Sergeant Trask, past Corporal Pretty, who had wanted so badly to be seen, and who now turned to follow the colonel with his eyes, confused, because his brain had filed me under a single word, and the word was help, and the colonel was walking away from every important person in the room and directly toward the help. Colonel Shaw stopped in front of me, and then he came to attention before a woman in grease-stained coveralls with a rag in her fist, and he raised his right hand in a salute so exact that his heels came together with a click that carried in the total silence to every corner of that bay, and he held it. "Ma'am," he said, "I read your citation." He was not saluting my rank. He outranked me by 4 full grades, and he knew it to the bone. He was rendering the honor that every soldier renders up to and including the ones who wear stars. To a recipient of the Medal of Honor, the honor you give first, and regardless of who outranks whom, the one exception the whole hierarchy makes to itself. And he was holding it, waiting, because the custom is that he holds the salute until I choose to return it and release him. Every wrench in the bay had gone quiet. Corporal Pretty stood 10 feet away with a shop rag still hanging from his hand, and I watched the color go out of his face, one shade at a time, the way water goes out of a sink, as the single word he had filed me under dissolved completely and left nothing behind it but a hole, and he stood at the edge of the hole and looked down into it and understood that he was already falling. I brought my own hand up and returned the salute, clean and unhurried. "As you were, sir," I said. My voice was steadier than I was, but a steady voice is a thing you can learn, and I had learned it a long time ago, on a road, at 11 kilometers an hour. For a moment, nobody in the bay moved, and then the room did the exact thing that I had come to this shop, to these coveralls, to this cold and early and merciful gray morning, specifically and desperately to avoid. It rearranged itself around me. I felt it happen, physically, a shifting of the whole room's gravity so that I was suddenly at the center of it, which is the one place I have spent 10 years trying not to be. The 3 soldiers by the tool cage who had laughed at Pretty's joke could not look at me now, and their not looking was its own loud kind of noise, a scramble to become small and unmemorable, to not have been part of it, though they had been. Master Sergeant Trask had gone very carefully blank, and underneath the blank I could see a man rapidly reshelving the whole morning, every exchange, every assumption, and finding himself standing in each one of them and not liking where he was standing. And Corporal Pretty, 22 years old, had begun to fully understand what he had done, and to whom, and the understanding was a live thing crawling up his throat and taking his voice with it as it went. Colonel Shaw, to his considerable credit, read the room and did not perform it. He did not make a speech. He lowered his voice so that it was for me and not for the audience. "I didn't know you'd reported in," he said. "Your Gaines packet came across my desk yesterday. I read the citation last night at my kitchen table twice." A small pause. "I did not expect to find you under a truck at 0900 on your first morning." "That's where the truck was, sir," I said. Something moved at the corner of his mouth that was not quite a smile, but was related to one. He understood. Some people would not have, but he did, and I felt an unwilling flicker of respect for a man who could stand in the middle of all that and still catch the small dry joke and know it for the olive branch it was. And then, because he was a good officer, and because good officers spend their careers trying to give their best people good things, he made me the offer that I had been running from for 10 years. And he made it kindly, and he had no way of knowing it was the cruelest thing anyone had said to me all morning, worse by far than grab a mop, honey. "Sergeant, we can do a great deal better than this for you," he said, and he meant it as a gift. He meant it the way you offer someone a chair when they have been standing too long. "Brigade could use you, public affairs, a speaking billet, recruiting command would fight over you. You have earned the right to be done crawling under trucks. Say the word, right now, and it is done by close of business." And there it was, the cage, held open, polished, with a ribbon on it, offered by a decent man who was completely certain he was setting me free. Behind him, Corporal Pretty had found some fragment of his voice, and it came out all wrong, too fast, cracking in the middle. "Sergeant!" "I didn't. I swear to God I didn't know who you were. I would never have And then he stopped, because there was nowhere for the sentence to go that did not make it worse. I looked at him for a moment, and there, standing in the wreck of his own morning, he had put his finger without meaning to on the exact thing that had been wrong for 10 years, the thing at the bottom of all of it. I didn't know who you were. He had stopped only because of who I turned out to be. The woman he had thought I was 3 hours ago, the tired civilian in coveralls he flicked a rag at and called honey and ordered to mop his floor, that woman had deserved not to be treated that way just as much, exactly as much. And she had gotten no colonel, and no salute, and no click of heels. The medal did not make me worth respecting. It had never once made me worth respecting. It just made me impossible to ignore, which is a different thing, and a lonelier one, and I had spent a decade learning the difference in rooms full of people who could not tell them apart. I looked at the truck I had not finished. I looked at the open door of the glass office and the escape being held out to me through it. I looked at the frightened young man who had called me honey and who was now waiting to find out how much of his life I was going to take in exchange. And I knew, the way I know a bad bearing by the feel of it coming up through a socket, that every easy answer in that room was the wrong one. Colonel Shaw walked me to the small glass office in the corner of the bay, away from the ears, and he closed the door behind us, and he waited. Through the glass I could see the whole shop pretending to work while it watched us, hands moving on tools that were not turning. "I'm grateful, sir," I said. "I want to be completely clear about that, because I mean it, and I don't want it to get lost in what I'm about to say, but I am going to say no." He tilted his head, not offended, just genuinely curious, a man encountering something he had not predicted. "To the public affairs slot." "To all of it! To the office, the podium, the whole thing! With respect, sir, I did not come back to be looked at. I spent 10 years being looked at. I was very good at it. It nearly finished me, and I mean that as plainly as I know how to say it. There were mornings toward the end of it when I could not find the person who was supposed to be inside the uniform, when I would look in a mirror and see the poster and nothing behind the poster. I chose the words with care, because they were true, and I do not spend true things carelessly. My orders say Senior Maintenance NCO. I would like to be exactly that, and nothing more than that. Put my rank on the roster where it belongs, and let the medal stay in the drawer where I keep it. Let me work. He was quiet for a moment, studying me. "Most people would take the office," he said. "Most people spend their whole careers trying to get out of the bay." "I know it, sir. I'm not most people." That, it turns out, was the entire trouble. That drew a real smile from him, brief and surprised and human. He looked out through the glass at the bay, and his eyes went to Corporal Pretty, who was standing very straight at his bench and staring hard at nothing. "And him?" the colonel asked. "Because I will tell you honestly, Sergeant, what I watched when I came through that door does not sit well with me. He put his hands on your dignity in front of your soldiers, and he did it because he thought there would be no cost. I can arrange a cost. I can make the next 6 months of that young man's life extremely educational." This was the part I had already decided. Somewhere in the space between the salute and the office, the way you decide the important things a beat before you consciously know you have decided them. "Leave him to me, sir," I said. "No paperwork, no counseling statement from you, no phone call to his chain, nothing on the record. I will handle it in the shop my way." Shaw looked at me for a long moment, weighing it. "You could end him," he said, "not as a temptation, just as a fact laid on the table between us. You would be within your rights. Some would say you would be right to." "I could," I agreed. "And he would spend 6 months being frightened, and fear teaches a man exactly one lesson, sir, which is how to not get caught next time. I have known plenty of soldiers who learned that lesson very well and never learned a single other thing. I would rather teach him something that outlasts the fear if he has it in him to learn it, and I won't know whether he does until I try." I thought about a 19-year-old I used to be, and the sergeants who had made her, the ones who shaped by shouting, and the rarer and better ones, who shaped by showing. The medal was never a weapon, sir. I have watched people try to turn it into one, for me, on my behalf, in rooms where I was standing right there, and it always made me feel worse than the insult ever did. I am not going to pick it up and swing it at a 22-year-old with a mop. That is not what it is for, and it is not what the man who died so that I could earn it would want it used for. I knew him. He would have hated it. Colonel Shaw was quiet for a good while after that, long enough that I heard the bay noise start up tentatively on the other side of the glass. And then he nodded, slowly, and whatever it was he had been looking for in my face, he seemed to find it. "You know," he said, I commanded a battalion in that same province, a year after your convoy. Different valley, same kind of road. I walked ground not far from where you fought." He turned his cover over in his hands. "I have thought a great deal over the years about the people who kept those trucks running, the ones nobody puts on a poster. It is a strange thing to finally meet one and have her be the woman I just watched get told to grab a mop." He put the cover back on and squared it. "The shop is yours, Sergeant Vale. Run it exactly the way you think it ought to be run, and I will keep the machine off your back, all of it, the public affairs people and the rest. You have my word." "Thank you, sir." "Don't thank me for it. Just—" He paused with his hand on the door. "Just do the thing you so obviously know how to do. There is not nearly enough of it going around, and I am not talking about fixing trucks." The citation is not long. They almost never are. The language in them is flat and formal and stripped bare on purpose, because the events do not need any help from adjectives, and the flatness is itself a kind of respect, a way of saying we are not going to dress this up. We are just going to tell you what she did and let it stand. Colonel Shaw asked me before he left the office whether he might have Master Sergeant Trask read mine to the shop one time and then never make another thing of it again as long as I served there. I did not want a ceremony. I have had my fill of ceremonies to last 3 lifetimes, but I understood what he was actually offering, which was to let the men who had misjudged me that morning learn the truth from a piece of paper instead of from rumor, cleanly, once, so that the story could not grow the poisonous version of itself that untold stories always grow. I thought about it, and I said yes, so the shop gathered. Not at attention, just gathered, wrenches down, in a loose half circle by the second lift, and Master Sergeant Trask read it out in his flat, patient, carrying voice. The date, the province, the convoy and the mountain road, the improvised charge, and the 2 vehicles disabled and burning. The specialist who, with complete disregard for her own safety and under sustained and accurate enemy fire, returned 3 separate times to the burning vehicles and extracted 3 wounded soldiers, and who then operated a badly damaged vehicle to move those casualties beyond the effective range of the enemy, sustaining wounds herself in the process and declining evacuation until the wounded had been treated. And the line that is in every one of them, the line about conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of her life above and beyond the call of duty, which sounds like nothing the first time you hear it and like everything once you understand that it means, when you finally take it apart, that on one specific morning, a specific and ordinary person did far more than anyone had any right to ask of a human being, and lived. Trask finished. He folded the paper along its old creases carefully, the way you fold something that is not yours. The shop was very quiet, and I did not want them looking at me the way they were looking at me, with that shine coming into their eyes that I have never been able to stand. So I did the only thing that has ever reliably fixed a room for me. I picked my wrench back up, and I turned back to the truck, and I made it clear with my shoulders and my hands that the reading was over, and the day most certainly was not, and there was a fleet coming due, and trucks that did not care about any of it. Later that same morning, I walked over to Corporal Pretty's bay. He straightened when he saw me coming and started, again, on the apology, and I held up a hand and stopped him before it could get going. "I don't want the apology," I said. "I mean that? You don't owe me an apology, and if you give me one, it'll be for you, not for me, so save it. What you owe me is a better morning than the one you gave me, and you can't go back and hand me that one now, so we're going to do the next best thing instead." I reached over and picked a wrench up off his bench and set it in his open hand. "You're going to help me pull the alternator off that truck, and while we do it, you're going to keep your mouth closed and your ears open, and you're going to listen to me. Can you do that?" "Yes, Sergeant," he said. We worked. I showed him the trick of the top bolt that everyone barks their knuckles on, and he listened. And after a few minutes, when his hands were busy and his eyes were down on the work where it is easier for a young man to hear hard things, I said the only thing that was worth saying to him. "This morning you looked at me and you saw somebody beneath you, somebody it was safe to be cruel to, because she couldn't do anything about it, and she couldn't do anything for you either. No rank to punish you, no pull to help you. Just a tired woman with a mop." I broke the bolt loose and handed him the next one down. "That is the thing to fix in yourself. And listen to me, because this is the whole point, and I need you to actually hear it. It has nothing to do with the metal. If I had really been the contract cleaner you thought I was, every single thing you did would have been exactly as wrong as it was, and there would have been no colonel walking through that door to make you feel it in your stomach. You just would have gotten away with it, and getting away with it would have been worse for you, not better, because you'd have done it again, and again, a little more each time, until it was just who you were. He was quiet, working, his jaw tight. "The measure of a person," I said, "is not how they treat the colonel. Anybody can be decent to the colonel. The measure is how you treat the person you have decided is nobody, the one who can't reward you and can't hurt you, because that, Corporal, is who you actually are, underneath all of it. That's the real you, the one that comes out when you're sure nobody who matters is watching, and somebody's always watching. Usually it's you." He worked in silence for a long moment, and then he said, in a completely different voice than the one he had used at 0620 that morning, quiet and low and without any performance left in it, "Yes, Sergeant, I hear you." And the smirk was gone all the way down, and something else had come up into his face in its place, something young and stung, and for the first time since I had laid eyes on him, genuinely teachable. In the weeks that followed, the shop found its own level again, which is honestly all you can ever really ask of a shop. The three men who had laughed carried a small private shame around with them, and it made them quieter for a while, and in an odd way, better, because a man who has caught himself being cruel and did not like the look of his own reflection tends to watch that edge in himself more carefully afterward. The easy motor pool reflex, the ancient one, of scanning a room for whoever seems lowest and making them the joke to bond everyone else together, went quiet in that bay. Not because I banned it. You cannot ban it. It goes quiet because everyone in the room has now seen with their own eyes where that particular road can end, and no one wants to be the one standing in the middle of it when the truth comes walking through the door, because the truth does that. Eventually, it always eventually walks through the door. Private First Class Kessler was the youngest soldier in the shop. 19 years old, quiet, half invisible, in the specific way that the very youngest and newest always are, the way I had been once. She had not laughed that morning. I had noticed that she had not laughed. I noticed the ones who do not laugh, always, in every room, because they are usually the ones with something worth watching in them. So I started keeping her near me. I would hand her the diagnosis instead of the diagnosis and the answer together, and make her chase the fault down herself, and stand back and let her be wrong twice and right the third time, and watch her hands slowly begin to learn to listen, the way mine had learned at her age from a sergeant who believed in me before I had given him any reason to. She was going to be very good, better than good. Somebody, somewhere up the line, had very nearly let her stay invisible, had almost let her spend her whole enlistment being nobody's project. I was not going to be that somebody. I knew exactly what it cost. The story tried to grow legs, the way these stories always do. Within a day, half the post had heard some version of it, and the versions were getting shinier and taller as they traveled from mouth to mouth, and a public affairs officer called the shop twice in 1 week wanting to build something out of it. A feature, a photo spread, a nice tidy piece about the hero hiding in the motor pool, the whole machine warming up its engine right on schedule. And Colonel Shaw kept his word, all of it. He put himself squarely between me and the whole apparatus. The calls stopped. The feature never got made. I got to keep that morning as exactly what it had actually been. A hard hour inside an ordinary workday, instead of having to watch it get sanded down and painted up and turned into one more poster, the way every real thing in my life had been turned into a poster for 10 years. And Corporal Pretty changed. That is the part I am proudest of. More than any wrench I have ever turned in my life, more than the metal in the drawer. It was not overnight, and it was not a movie, and there were backslides. But he started coming in earlier. He started asking better questions, real ones, the kind you only ask when you have decided you would rather be good at something than look good at it. He stopped performing for whoever happened to outrank him in a given moment and started actually learning the trade. From the bottom, humbly. And a few months on, I watched him do a thing that told me it had gone all the way in and taken root. A brand new private, first week in the shop, nervous as a cat, knocked over a full drain pan of used oil and sent it spreading black across the floor, and then just stood there, frozen, braced for whatever was coming, the way you brace when you are new and you are certain you have just made yourself the joke of the day. And Corporal Pretty, who had once flicked a shop rag at a stranger's chest and called her honey, for far less than that, put down what he was holding and walked over and got a second mop off the rack, and he handed the private the first one, and he started cleaning it up right there next to him, shoulder to shoulder, and he said, loud enough that the whole bay could hear it and know he meant them to hear it, "Happens to everybody, man. First month I was here, I did worse. Grab the other end." I did not say a word. I just turned back to my truck, But I had heard it, and I had seen it, and something in me that the mountain had left broken a long time ago sat up a little straighter in its chair and looked around and thought, all right, that one's going to be fine. The bay sounded like a proper bay again after all that. Impact wrenches and the radio and the hiss of the airlines and somebody laughing, really laughing, at an actual joke, a joke about a man's genuinely terrible taste in music and not a joke about a person's worth. That is the sound of a shop that is right, and if you have ever worked in one, you know it the second you hear it, and if you have only ever worked in the other kind, you know that too, in a different way, in your shoulders. It had taken one bad morning to get us there. Most of the right things I have ever been part of cost a bad morning somewhere near the start of them. Ray Donnelly called me that night, the way she always does when she feels something in the air from 4 states away, which she somehow always does, and always has, since we were both 20 and terrified, and pretending very hard not to be. Ray and I came up together, 2 women in a world that had not been built with 2 women in mind, and she got out of the army 3 years ago, and I did not, and we have never once, not for a single day, let that put an inch of real distance between us. I told her the whole thing, start to finish, the coveralls and the mop and the rag flicked at my chest and the click of the colonel's heels in the office I had turned down. She was quiet for a second on the line, and then she laughed, low and warm, and entirely without meanness. So let me make sure I've got this straight, she said. The United States Army spent 10 solid years trying to bolt you to a podium and shine a light on you, and you finally felt like a whole human being again because a baby corporal who'd never met you called you honey and told you to go find a mop. When you say it like that, I said, it sounds completely insane. It is completely insane. It is also the most you thing I've ever heard in my life, and I have known you for 14 years. Her voice came down out of the joke and got soft in the way it only gets with me. You spent 10 years being everybody's proof of something, Mayor. Proof the Army takes care of its own. Proof a woman can do it. Proof the whole country isn't as bad as it looks on the news. That is a crushing thing to be asked to be. It is not a person. It is a symbol wearing your face and your name, and they had you wearing it so long you forgot you could take it off. I heard the click of a lighter, the old bad habit she will not quit, and I did not say one word about it, because there are nights when you let people have their small comforts, and this was one of them. And tonight you got to be a mechanic again, just somebody who is quietly good at a hard thing and does not need one single soul on earth to know it or clap about it. That is not nothing, do you hear me? That is the most something I have heard about your life in years. We talked about Danny Saris then, the way we only ever do with each other, because Ray is one of maybe 4 people left alive who can say his name out loud to me and have it land in the right place instead of the wrong one. We did the thing we always do, which is not to be sad about him, exactly, but to be accurate about him, which is harder and better. We remembered him the way he actually was, the dog photo jammed in the helmet band, the terrible constant singing, the way he called everyone chief and thought it was the funniest thing in the world right up to the end. We let him be 20 years old and real and himself for a few minutes on a phone line stretched across 4 states, instead of a name cut into a wall or a face on a memorial slide. It is the only kind of grief I have ever found that does not take something from me. It gives him back for a little while instead. After she hung up, I sat alone in the dark for a while, and I did the arithmetic I have done every single day for 13 years, the only ledger I have ever really kept in my life. 3 men came home off that mountain road because my hands knew what to do that morning before the rest of me caught up to them. 1 man did not come home because sometimes you do every single thing right, and every single thing right is still not enough, and no medal and no motor pool and no colonel's salute and no amount of years will ever move that number by 1. I stopped a long time ago, trying to make the math come out even. It does not come out even. It is never going to come out even, and the day I truly understood, that was the day it stopped being able to destroy me. What I do instead now is let it be true without letting it pull me under. I hold Danny, and I hold the 3 who lived in the same 2 hands at the same time, which is the only honest way I have ever found to carry any of it. Being right about the corporal, being finally revealed as the thing I had been all along, that was cold. It is always cold. I had a full decade of being proven right about, in rooms full of applause and camera flashes, and not 1 second of it ever once warmed me by a single degree. But being back at the bench, with grease worked deep into the lines of my knuckles and a truck in front of me that actually needed me and did not care in the slightest what I had done in a valley 13 years ago, That was warm. That was warm all the way through. And given the plain choice between the two, and that morning, at long last, I was finally given the choice, I chose warm. I will choose warm every single time it is offered to me for the rest of my life, and I will not apologize to anyone for it. Months went by the way the good months do, which is to say quietly, without a single thing happening in them that anyone could ever shape into a story. And that quiet was the entire prize, the whole reward, the thing I had been reaching for across 10 loud years. I ran the shop the way I had wished, at 19, that the shops of my own youth had been run, back when I was the youngest and the newest, and nobody in particular was keeping me near them. I ran it so that the person who seemed lowest on any given day was the person I watched out for first and hardest, because I had now stood at both ends of that, the poster and the furniture, the salute and the flicked rag, and I knew down to my bones what it cost a human being to be treated as a thing, and I was not going to hand that cost down to one more 19-year-old on my watch. Kessler turned into exactly the mechanic I had known she would become. There came a morning when she found a fault that I had missed, an intermittent one, the kind that makes you feel like you are losing your mind, and she came and told me about it, carefully, braced to be wrong, the way you are when you are still young enough to think that being wrong in front of someone you respect is the end of the world. And she was not wrong. She was right, and I was the one who had missed it. And I told her so, out loud, in front of the whole shop, that she had caught something I had walked past. Because being told you were right, in front of the people whose opinion you have decided to care about, is a thing that can change a young soldier's entire spine, can set it straighter for years. Somebody did that for me once, a long time ago, and I have never once forgotten it, and I have tried to pay it down ever since, one soldier at a time. Corporal Pretty made sergeant in time and got a bay of his own to lead, and he led it well, better than I would have predicted on that first gray morning. The soldiers under him did not fear him, and they did not run him over either, which is the narrow good road that most young leaders never manage to find, falling off one side into being feared or the other side into being ignored. He never once brought up that first morning to me again, and I never brought it up to him, and we did not need to, either one of us, because we both knew that it was the hinge his whole career and maybe his whole character had turned on. And some hinges you do not have to point at and name out loud. You just walk through the door they opened, and you are quietly grateful the door is there. The metal itself lives in a drawer in my quarters, in a flat case, underneath a folded shirt. I do not keep it on a wall. I do not wear the little lapel rosette they give you to pin on civilian clothes so that strangers will know. Once a year, in March, on the day of that road, I take it out of the drawer and I sit with it for a while in the quiet, and I think about Danny Saris and his mother, and the small, clean kitchen, and the lie I told her that was the truest and most necessary thing I ever said in my life. And then I put it back in the drawer, under the shirt, and I go to work. That is the only ceremony it gets from me anymore. And it is enough. And I have come to believe that it is actually what the thing is for, that the drawer and the one quiet March morning honor it better than any wall ever could. Colonel Shaw stopped by the shop now and then over the following year, not as a commander handing down favors, just as a man passing through who had come to understand something about me that most people never would in 100 years. He never saluted me in that bay again, not once, because I had asked him not to, and he was a man who honored what he was asked without needing to be asked twice. Instead, he would just give me a short nod, one professional to another across a bay full of trucks, and ask me how the fleet was running, and I would tell him honestly the good and the bad of it, and he would nod again and move on. And that was worth more to me than any salute could ever have been. Worth more than the click of heels, because it treated me as the exact thing I had fought so hard and given up so much to be allowed to simply be, which was a soldier who was very good at her job and wanted nothing more than to keep doing it. At the end of a shift, when the bay had emptied out and the last soldier had gone and the big roller doors were down and it was just me and the smell of oil and the small tick of engines cooling in the dark, I would wipe down my bench, slow, unhurried, the way you tidy something that you love rather than something you are merely finished with. Alone in the good way, not the lonely way. There is a difference between those two, and it took me most of my life to learn it, and I know it now. And the day, an ordinary day, a day with nothing in it anyone would ever write down, would feel like a whole life, a good one. Mine. Finally, unmistakably, entirely mine. So here is the one thing I know now, the thing that whole strange morning left behind in my hands like a tool I did not have before I walked in, and I am going to say it straight to you, whoever you are, wherever you are hearing this. because I have a feeling you have stood on one end of this or the other, and maybe, like me, on both. If someone decides that you are nothing before you have said a single word to them, before they know one single true thing about who you are, you do not owe them your proof. You do not have to open your file and show them your citation. You do not have to earn, in the next 30 desperate seconds, the basic human decency that they should have handed you for free, and did not. Their contempt is a statement about them, and it always was. From the very first second, and the day you finally stop trying to talk them out of it is the day you get your own life back into your own two hands. Do the work that is in front of you. Do it well, and do it quietly, and be kind. Be deliberately kind to the next person that the room has quietly decided is beneath it, because that person is you, and you are them, and when you get right down to the bottom of all of it, the whole of a life only ever really comes down to how we choose to treat the people who cannot do a single thing for us in return. And the truth, the real one, the one about who you actually are underneath the coveralls and the assumptions. You do not have to drag it into the room and set it down on the table and make everyone look at it. You can just let it be true and go on working, and it has a way, it really does, of walking through the door on its own, in its own time, when it is good and ready. And when it finally does, let it find you exactly where you always want it to be.